Okay. All right, so I'm gonna kind of start on the upper left here and loosely draw a section of the fabric. I'm gonna think about how far down this goes. If I think of this one section here, I'm gonna then look at the other tack and think about where it meets up there. I'm gonna look at this negative triangle here, kind of think about that negative space. So using angling and sighting, putting that down there like that, okay? That's like the basic shape. Looks like two peaks of a mountain in the Cascades or something like that. All right, so one of the trickiest things that I think that happens when you're doing lots of multiple folds is keeping track of where things are. So like when you're doing the rib cage and a skeleton, it's like keeping track of all the ribs and knowing which one's where and like. So you're trying to find a system that you can start to understand what you're drawing and not forget. So I'm gonna try to find these a second kind of set of basic shapes. So there's a fold here. This one comes up here. There's like a darker area here. This is kind of wider, and there's another little, this comes up a little bit, and there's another little fold there. I'm keeping it really loose here so I can adjust, because it's, again, you lose track. So now I'm distinguishing where those two are here, how that comes up. There's another little fold there and there. So I just did another layer. I did the basic, then did a little bit of detail. Now in here, there's a couple of more that start to emerge. That goes like that, and then there's something like that, and then it starts to get into here. So really loose in general at the beginning. Doing your best to keep track. You know, with folds, if you kind of miss one, we're probably not going to be able to tell. So you're just trying to do your best with keeping track of the folds. Then you're going to locate your darkest darks and kind of map those out all over it. And again, I'll try not to take too long with this, so I'll just try to focus in on a section. I know that this cast shadow here is one of my darkest darks. Yeah, there's just a lot of texture under here, but that's fine. So every time I look up at the still life, the fabric that I'm drawing, I pause, but I don't move my charcoal. So I just pause and look up, pause and look up. So that's there. If you notice that something needs to be adjusted, like here's that triangle, this actually comes up again a little more. I already raised it a little bit. I'm gonna raise it a little bit more before I've committed to it, because it's pretty easy to do that with the vine or the willow. You don't have to do much to adjust. So you gotta kind of start to lay out your darkest darks. And use the side, do some mash gesture. So let's say I focus in on this area here, since that's kind of what I'm drawing. What you would do is over the whole fabric, you would do this kind of technique. You know, in here, I'm pausing, I'm looking to see where the darkest darks are, pausing. I'm not worrying about all the details yet. I'm just kind of worrying about keeping track of where things are. As you add the charcoal, things are gonna kind of merge together. So trying to distinguish the difference between the cast shadow and the fabric will be helpful. There's cast shadow there, cast shadow here, goes up to there. It should and probably will look pretty messy at first. And it might look like you're drawing a couple of lines, but really that's a shadow, and then it slowly goes into the fold. So if you can think about the directionality of your application of the charcoal, it'll really help you. And not overdoing it. So sometimes I see people with the directionality and everything's kind of starts to get stylized, like swooping around. You don't want to over exaggerate it. So usually you want to kind of go in one direction and then maybe even it out. And so you're still going from a gradation of dark to light, but you'll refine it later. So here's this one, this is here. It's really dark. Like if you can find some of those really dark areas, that's gonna help you kind of establish what's what. This is here. So I'm on this, you can kind of see where I'm at. I'm at the right fold. And then this goes from dark to light. And don't forget to keep looking, because it's very easy to stylize fabric, just to kind of think you know where things are at. I mean, I do it. It's like, oh yeah, it looks nice. But you're really trying to make it look like what you see, rather than just dark to light, just dark to light. Where is it dark to light in the drawing, in the fabric that you see? And then this here, this is a nice area because there's this little fold like that. And then this goes up. And the trick is, you know, trying to work quickly so that you don't take too long with it. You know, you could perfect everything. It doesn't need to look like a perfect drawing. You want to have a lot of contrast. And ideally no outline, but those crisp edges, just like when we're doing this and drawing one right now. Trying to keep track of where things are. If you get lost, just kind of finding an anchor point again, like here's that little fold up here. I'm gonna try to keep that. Trying to keep some of the white of the paper is good because you're gonna bring charcoal over there later. So let's, I think we're kind of, maybe I'll start over here to kind of refine a little bit. So I did one first layer was just adding the vine. The second was adding a little bit more detail with the vine. The third is adding mass gesture with the side of the compressed charcoal, locating where some of the darks are. Again, you would try to do like this over more of the whole thing, but you want to keep the contrast when you're adding that mass gesture so you can kind of keep track of where things are. So now I'm going to get my blending tools. I have my chamois, I have my eraser, my kneaded eraser. One of the things that can happen with the chamois, so like maybe I'll do it here. There's texture under there that you can kind of see it. All of a sudden what happens when you start to blend sometimes is it looks nice, maybe the charcoal's nice and smooth, but you lose some of that rawness that gives it a lot of life and presence. It's that contrast. The light and the dark right there give it like, oh, you can see it, it just kind of pops. And so when you start to blend, it's like with painting, all of a sudden everything can really easily get muddy. So if that happens, just know that you can pull it back with the erasers. You can't keep that same amount of like seeing the white of the paper underneath. That same texture is a little bit harder to keep, but you can pull back some of the contrast. You can also, you know, it could be helpful. I just blended some of that charcoal here, so I have some charcoal on this. I could use that to apply a little bit of charcoal in some areas and not get too dark. I tend to have a kind of a heavy hand with a charcoal. So this could be a nice way to add a little bit of charcoal, just to show you that kind of technique. If I'm over here, it can quickly kind of look more finished, but what'll happen is I'll need to go through and start erasing to kind of pull it back. And you could even kind of smear some of it and actually add a little charcoal ground and then go back up with the eraser. But you can see what starts to happen. You know, this is more activated and interesting, but this could get there. It's just gonna have more layers to get there. So if I'm using it over here, I'm now putting it on my finger so I can have a little bit more control. You could also use your blending stump. The blending stumps are a little less all over and a little bit more like right in a certain area like this. So if you're someone who tends to like doing a lot of repetitive kind of mark making and having a little more texture, the blending stump can be really nice. It usually takes a little longer because it's smaller. So the chamois can go quicker, but you don't have as much control. So you have to be a little careful that you just don't kind of wipe it everywhere. So they have different kind of things that they do. And when you're blending, it's really important to continue looking and try not to blend away all of the white. I mean, I kind of went overboard here to show you guys, and I'll try to pull some of it out, but you're trying to keep some of the white there. And you're just adding another layer in the process. So here, it's dark here, it's really dark in here. I'm gonna use my finger to kind of condense the charcoal because I know that this is a pretty dark area, even though it might not be completely black. It's pretty dark in there, and it'll help remind me that that's going in and that this is coming out. So I can pull some of it out later, but that'll help me. And you want to, don't forget that your light source, where your light source is, because again, it's really easy to kind of get stylized with it. But I'm trying to get a little shadow over here. It's dark in there. There's a little, so if you remember the reflected light, there's a little reflected light there. And remember, this isn't the final layer. So when you start to blend this, you know, you're going to want to keep some of the white, but try to remember that you're going to add more charcoal and erase some more too. So I'm kind of giving it a charcoal ground in a way. And also with the background, you know, you could add a little bit of just charcoal to the background. So you see how you can use the chamois to kind of do that. And you could also go back in with the eraser. Like let's say you added too much, you know, you could use the side of this plastic eraser and just kind of lighten it up a little bit. If you can go like this, you can lighten up a lot of the charcoal and then rub back into it. You can do a lot of stuff there. like this is a little lighter over here, so I might take some of that charcoal away in here. And then you can blend it again later. So you can take away with the eraser, blend it again later. So retractable eraser is very helpful right now because there's usually a lot of little detailed areas. This eraser is good for maybe taking out, like if I needed to highlight this here, because I know it's lighter, I can do it really quick. And I know I'm going up through that whole thing. So that's gonna be a better decision than using the retractable eraser there. But maybe it makes more sense to use the retractable eraser kind of here. If I want to go right up on the edge and I want to have a little bit more control in a certain area. You know, there's some wrinkles and stuff, let's say, that I want to try to articulate. Maybe then I would want to use this because I can go in multiple different directions. It might act like cross-hatching, give a little bit more texture and a little bit more substance. Texture can sometimes be tactile and you can kind of feel what the material is a little bit more. So getting back over here, this I know is a highlight. So if you're drawing and you're kind of not sure where to go, see where your eye goes at what you're drawing and where you can be like, okay, there's a highlight, there's a shadow. Like here, there's a shadow, here, there's a highlight. I can kind of see that and understand that. So I'm gonna go back to that area and see if I can pull some of that out. It gets wider up here. And then you want to blend it in because there's a lot of kind of gradation of value. There's some abrupt areas and then there's some gradation of value. As you're working in a certain area, you can also add more charcoal. So there's a shadow there. I want to add a little bit more. You can blend it in. It's a lot of adding and erasing and adding and erasing. And you can see there's also the kneaded eraser. In certain areas you could use the kneaded eraser if that works well for you. You can kind of drag it over the surface. It'll take away a little charcoal. If you press harder, it'll take away more charcoal. If you just kind of drag it over the surface, it could, like, especially if you have a lot of charcoal and you want to pull that out, it could be a nice way to pull some of that charcoal out. You can erase a little bit. Like this is a dark shadow. It's darkest here and then it gets a little bit lighter here, but I don't want to take away too much. That can be a nice place to use that. Excuse me, that eraser. I think that the one I use the most is the retractable eraser. It is like up here, it'll really help me pull this away from the wall. There's a reflected light right here. So sometimes when you're doing that, you can kind of make a little line and then pull it in a little like this. And with fabric, there's often little wrinkles and little folds and stuff like that. So it gives you a lot of that control and texture. And just go in different directions. You can, again, you can use your finger here and there really quickly and easily to kind of blend some of it. And it's really important at a certain point, you know, you got to kind of work on it and get to a certain point to do this, but you want to step back because when you're right up against it, you're not quite sure if it's making sense exactly how you want it to make sense. But if you trust your eye, it will make sense. It just sometimes takes a minute to get there. And it's a lot of kind of back and forth. So, and you can decide if you want to like include the tack or not. And so in little areas like that, that's when something like the blending stump will come in handy. When you can't quite, maybe you add a little charcoal, you know, you gotta move it around a little bit and you can get in there with the blending stump and move it around a little bit easier in that little area. So each, like this fold has reflected light, has this core of the shadow here, and shadow and light, and it kind of goes down in this direction, this particular one, so I'm going to add a little bit more charcoal there. Go like that. Retractable eraser. I'm always looking back and forth. I don't expect myself to just visually exactly memorize what I just saw. You're just trying to remind yourself what you see, and then pull it up over here. Looking back. And then if you do something like that, you don't want it to just be a line, so you want to probably pull it in there a little bit. But it's a pretty thin reflected light there, so. And then if you get a little too textured with it, you can smooth it out here. If you have more, like here, it's a little bit brighter right there. And then this area is bigger, so I'd probably use the larger plastic eraser. You can still use the side of it if you want. You could do something like this, even though it doesn't go in that direction. Let's say you have a lot to take off. You can still go in a vertical direction like this, even though the fabric goes this way, and you can blend it later. So let's say you're just trying to get a lot of charcoal off. You're trying to lighten up that area. You're trying to get rid of that outline that might be there. How can you make that a crisp edge without having the outline? Then you can just, go forward and erase it, and then later you can either use your finger or the chamois or something and kind of blend some of that dark over. Maybe I use my chamois over here to add a little bit of, just the white of the wall that's actually darker than the fabric. It's more of a yellow white in a way. So we can bring some of that over here. Sometimes when we're adding charcoal, like there's a lot of texture right now and I'm adding with the chamois. Once you have a lot here, it'll sit back a little bit. It won't be so obvious that's there. So it's important to add charcoal and not to get too afraid of those darks. So I could continue to kind of get it all in there, but I don't want to take away too much of your drawing time here. There's a lot of little details in this area. Make it look like it's going forward. Oops. I have a lot of things in my hands. I do tend to keep a lot in my hands. So it's really easy to go back and forth between things. But again, you're just kind of trying to keep track of where the darks are, where the lights are. You're gonna need to lighten it up again, especially if you got a little messy with the charcoal. This is pretty light right here, and that's an important one because that'll hopefully push this forward. It's really light, and it kind of has this little thin, and having charcoal around it will help me kind of see it. So I put a little charcoal ground. There's this little thin highlight there, right, that goes up here, and that gets a little thicker, and it's even a little darker in there, right in here. And then this gets wider as it goes up. And it goes, so see how I'm making that kind of a crisp light edge right up against the black of the charcoal behind it, and that'll help give it that contrast so it pops. Okay, you step back. Is it working? It looks better from far away, so that's good. This is a helpful area, because this kind of looks kind of similar. That's a critical point because it'll kind of create transitional space there. So you'd continue. This is probably halfway through or so, a third of the way through of what I would do if I was doing it. That's good? Sufficient? You guys? Yeah.